Chris Hopkins also believes Jeremy Corbyn may pose a threat to a high-profile Labour politician, but not necessarily Sir Keir Starmer. Nigel Farage is in a position to inflict significant damage to Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party if he opts to make a sensational return to frontline politics using Reform UK, a pollster has predicted. Chris Hopkins believes the eurosceptic party, now led by former Brexit Party MEP Richard Tice, could shave enough support of the Tories in some key marginals to allow the Labour Party to win them. However, he also warned Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer the prospect of a new left-wing party led by his predecessor Jeremy Corbyn would represent a threat of its own. Not least should the independent MP opt to run against Sadiq Khan in the forthcoming London mayoral election. Reform UK set out its strategy for 2024 during a press conference last week, during which Mr. Tice insisted he would be fielding candidates in all 650 constituencies and ruled out the possibility of an election pact with the Tories. Mr. Tice also took the opportunity to unveil Ben Habib, also a former Brexit Party MEP, as their candidate for the forthcoming Wellingborough by. However, one person was conspicuous by his absence, Mr. Farage himself, who, though honorary president, has largely kept a low profile and has not confirmed whether he will be directly involved in election campaigning for the. Chris Hopkins, director of polling firm Savanta, told Express, Farage would certainly be their biggest asset. He's as close to celebrity as politicians get. He's relatively charismatic and has name recognition that members of the shadow cabinet, and cabinet, for that matter, could only dream. He's also an experienced campaigner, and I think he helps professionalize and legitimize them as a party. Mr. Hopkins added, I think there's definitely a threat from Reform UK, and I think it's most likely to affect the Conservatives. There are a number of seats where if we add together the projected Conservative and Reform vote shares, it comes out higher than the Labour vote share which we're projecting them to win with. Such seats were not necessarily where one expects Reform to be at their most popular, but could nevertheless end up being where they would end up doing most damage to the Conservatives, Mr. Hopkins predicted. He said, in some of these seats, we're only projecting Reform to achieve 3 to 4 of the vote, but that could theoretically be enough to tip the vote Labour's way. We've seen some evidence of that in recent by-elections, although with the usual caveat of low turnout by-elections not being a great indicator of the threat minor parties give to the major ones. He said, how much of a threat they pose, then, is the big question, and I think it's too early to tell. Their performance in by-elections and council elections has also been quite poor and suggests their polling figures are unlikely to be replicated at a general election. Their polling figures feel a bit like a mid-term protest vote, and there's little actual electoral evidence to suggest otherwise at this stage. Nevertheless, Mr. Hopkins added, they've hit 9% in our last 2 polls before Christmas and had been at 7% for the 3 before that. This is consistently higher than the roughly 5% they've been polling throughout the majority of 2023. And this is despite Savanta's methods likely reducing their vote share compared to other pollsters. Turning his attention to Labour, whom Mr. Tice said Reform will be training their fire on between now and whenever Rishi Sunak goes to the country, Mr. Hopkins suggested the main threat would likely come from a completely different place, namely left-winger Mr. Corbyn.